Oh, snap. What's up, friends? Well, I guess I can adjust this a tiny bit. Forgive the messy hair. I was helping a friend pack because, important things tend to fall in these times. Happy new moon. Happy new moon in Aquarius. It's also a lunar new year, which in outside of the Gregorian calendar and other calendars, and various explorations of other calendars and hippie calendars and gringo calendars, um, in the dream spell, for instance, there's a day out of time, and I very much felt like, uh, with the heaviness of many precursors, that the first bit of the solar new year felt very much like a good 13, 14 days out of time. So here we are in time, at a fresh new start, um, birthing from the darkness, I suppose, in a dark moon and a new moon, in a lunar new year, the uh, fresh moon, fresh take of the season. Year of the snake, or so I read, which let us not underestimate the year of the snake. Uh, I know the last year was a much more loud symbol, but let us not underestimate the year of the snakes. Snakes aren't too different from dragons, after all. The lore says a man can slay a dragon, but snakes strike fear in most anyone, enough to run. I heard once that you can tell about a man's relationship to women, if they hate women, if they fear women, by how they react to snakes or their fears of snakes. It will say much of their fears and their disconnection, their relationship to themselves, their senses, and sensitivity. How cunning is a blind snake who can't feel the earthquake? Um, for as much as the year of the dragon may have asked us to speak toward emotions, the year of the snake is much more introspective and much more about our listening to. They'll point and scream and burn the forest for their fears and blame the snakes for living like ancient underwood, which I also think is a calling to remembrance of ways, as distant from comfort as it may be. It is always worth the while. So we have a moon in Aquarius, and we have the sun and Pluto and Mercury also in Aquarius. Mercury, particularly, moving in threes, which I think says a lot about its ability to communicate and create. Um, I don't think it's necessarily about doing either, but, and I say a lot about tertiary situations, but it's a creative space, it's a place of conjuring, and sometimes the impossible is the thing that ought to be entertained in those situations. Um, Opposing Mars and Cancer, which is a very familiar and interesting placement for me in particular, I think is a vulnerable place to be. I think is an overcompensating place to be. Um, I think you may challenge what aspect of you find to be a people pleaser. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to please, uh, and make people happy, but not at your own expense. And Mars and Cancer can be an overreacher. So careful not to stretch yourself too thin or reach off of a ledge. Uh, be careful, not cautious. I feel like caution is more hazardous, uh, in that context. Um, I do think all of those also, will specifically relate to groupings and patternings, scenery changing, habits changing, motivations changing, and that's very much a pattern evolving. If you can step into an equation and address the code in a certain way, essentially, direct your focus, and then that changes the order of operations, to parentheses a particular sequence, um, that you so choose. And that could also be changes in lots of things. Um, Changes in motivations for the things that we do, changes in the patterns that we choose to notice, the patterns that we make, the waves that we make, the waves that we notice, groupings of people even. I think in the shake of all of that is occurring, we are leaning toward uh, either familiar echoes or leaning toward more expansive circles. Um, a good circle can also inquire both of those things. But groupings of people, and scenes of people is also adjusting, shifting, even, um, almost like on a Rolodex, um, but it can still exist as another thing. There's a word for it that I saw in a funny short. Um, that can exist as another thing. It's funny what masks will lie underneath those patterns as well. And that can take many forms, both internally and externally. Uh, um, Neptune, Saturn, North Node, Venus, all in Pisces energy. So it's interesting that we have such a loner Mars in Cancer with all of this intense water energy, and in the midst of evaporation, or condensation with Aquarius, I would suppose. But all of these are really interesting because I do think, for all that Mars in Cancer may think that it needs to do, um, in the face of, or against, or in spite of, or with, um, all of these Aquarian energies, this Pisces energy is also saying very loudly and very clearly to follow your heart, to go with what your heart says, listen to your body. I'm learning that in my own way for sure. Um, you can hide your or mask your discomfort, um, but eventually the heart does show you, and the body will show you, in one way or another. And oftentimes depression can wreak havoc on the immune system more than anything, and you find yourself in a deeply surprising and troubling situation, uh, because of that avoidance, because of that ignoring very loud calls to attention, the kind of calls that Mars in Cancer wants to listen to, but is too busy listening to expectation to actually hear, uh, in an on and off day. Um, I think this North Node and Saturn and Neptune and Pisces is very much asking to dreaming in small parts, like dreaming in small scenes, dreaming in small aspects. And then even as I'm saying that, there's very literally like a technique of lucid dreaming where you almost like freeze frame bits and pieces of surroundings until you sort of drift off, but are still keeping your mind fairly active, like a shutter. Um, that is absolutely a space of creation. That is a space of imagination. That is a space of imagining the impossible. We have all of these, tropes and stories, but what if the opposite were, or something entirely else were to be true, um, in a different timeline, in a different evolving of this scenery changing, something it just slightly changes enough to be different. It's it's interesting too because we'll see a lot of like astrology takes on following your rising sign and et cetera, et cetera. And that's not false. However, I do find that the more I've learned about Western astrology and Eastern astrology, or Vedic astrology, I do find it's kind of like, like 3D lenses, and in order to get the full body of the picture, you can kind of overlay them. I think Western astrology lends itself a lot to our ego, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Your ego is very much an important part of you. However, too much of that is the poison, right? Is the difference between medicine and the poison. And when we lean so far into our ego, oftentimes that's a Mars and Cancer detriment, like trying too hard, doing too much, constantly moving the goalpost, and constantly unfulfilled for that exact reason. Whereas I've found in Vedic astrology, what is our Venus in Western astrology and Vedic or Eastern astrologies, um, would be more so your rising, and more so leading toward where you find fulfillment rather than where you find validation. That's probably the clearest difference. Where you find fulfillment rather than validation. So keep those things in mind, when you're looking at all of these things. I am beginning to like, I got so excited that people were getting interested about this stuff. And now I'm beginning to loathe this what's your sign question, because I am all of them. You are all of them. We are all of them. It's the circle of fits. It's a cycle of harmonies. That's why your Venus and Mars will tell you much more about the way that you move in the world and the reasons why than your Sun, Moon, Rising can. All of those combinations are also sensitive bits of chemistry. So, like, I hate when people try to test it too, and it's like, shit, man, I don't know. I don't have a lot of earth in my chart, but I've done a lot of fucking work, so people assume that I'm an earth sign a lot of times, and that's that's the perfect example that I'm trying to make. The ways that you till or play with these things, in their stock mode, are all perceivable from different angles, and are very sensitive chemical changes that you can adapt with, and to, and allow to adapt with you. Um, in the same way that there's new galaxies constantly, expanding and contracting, and that we won't see for thousands of years. Um, the way the sky is constantly surprising us. Never feel trapped in. It's ultimately a manual. I digress. Follow your heart. Don't forget what you know. Ooh, very interesting aspect of everything. Jupiter and Gemini, a funny, almost like Switzerland to all of these like very intense energies, right? But it's intense nonetheless, and I feel like it's very much a crossroads, or a decision maker, or some kind of major or a shift in and pivot in perspective, like drastically so. Jupiter is a longer orbit. Gemini is, I feel like, generally a almost like fly on the wall kind of energy, and in this case would be much more of a no, say yes or no, left or right, like I'm making the turn, and that is exciting and terrifying. Um, but I think where you find fear, look for excitement. Where you find fear, look past it. If your fear is logic, look past that and get creative. That is also a logical problem solving tool. Uh, the fear is becoming very tangible, embodied even. And I think because we've ignored it so much. Um, Years ago, I had seen the fear, and it was a very clear, gripping thing, very sticky substance. And I looked to the moon, and the moon told me to breathe. And so I breathed. Breathed. I exhaled. I had been holding my breath at this point because of the fear, right? There's fucking hands, just slick oil hands ripping me into the earth. And I exhaled, and I watched them all sort of dissipate, and all of this space was created. Um, I don't. even necessarily feel like it wants to do harm. It just wants to be held, understood. Um, it wants to be validated in the same way that fear and anxiety probably checks and challenges the ego, right? Uh, but ultimately, if it is personified, then it's a feeling thing, it's a compassionate thing. Uh, how do we find that soft spot in it? You know, it's kind of like amidst the angry adult, there's a wounded child. You got to tap into that and find where that leads. And in a lot of ways, that's also, again, back to following your heart. It will often lead you back to where it has been torn in these younger states, or where it has been healed, conversely, which also leads me to Chiron being the mastery of. Um, Chiron's moving. I said something about something else moving in the series of Mercury moving in threes. Chiron's moving in nines. Um, and these two are very much the important factors that I'm picking up, right? And that I'm noticing. Uh, Chiron's the wounded warrior. It's often your greatest weakness and your greatest superpower. Um, Chiron's been in Aries for a hot minute, uh, kicking our fucking ass, really. Um, and I think it's because we're turning our back on certain lessons. In a grand scheme of things, the government's turning its back on the lessons that we've been crying about. You know, what ways are we still evading uh, uh, bits and pieces of ourselves, whether, you know, that be passions that we've put off or put on our back pocket, or, you know, what have you, whatever it is that you've got on the back burner, check it out. Um, but Chiron moving in nines is very much this mastery of, this sort of full circle of, and that's, I think, both where we get the fear getting more personified, more palpable, more tangible, more intense. A lot of people having panic attacks, anxiety attacks, heart attacks, etc., etc. A lot of deaths. Uh, it's an elevation and a level up. It's also the momentum and the direction behind a lot of things. There was another video I did where it was like, will you be led by your pain, or will you know, transmute it, transcend it? That very much applies here as well. Um, or it becomes more real and more flesh and blood and more reality. This is a big part of Jupiter and Gemini too. It's not just a crossroads. It may very well be a different timeline altogether. Like the man in the high castle, uh, a meditation, a teleportation, which science can now do with data, and we are uh, more than matter and also data, um, and also code. Uh, and I think if we were to look at this as a jumping of timelines, then a mastery of your greatest weakness. Turn your greatest weakness into your superpower. What's your X-Men comic book character super arc, you know? Because I've definitely thought of that. Leader of the Morlocks, what's up? Underground shenanigans. Um, and I want that to be a motivator, a, a motivator in the ways that we lead. Aries can be very fickle and can be hard-headed and not necessarily think things through, but mastering the intensity of that energy, and whatever Chiron's doing for you, um, ultimately will solidify what we've learned and elevate us beyond that. It becomes sort of like a boost into a new timeline, into the highest self, into mastery of a skill, mastery of the self, mastery of and that's not to say that once this is done, you're the master of everything and you're fucking done. That is to say progress and growth and a new leaf and a new petal. But that does not mean you're ever done. I think perhaps in a very real way, mastery is not necessarily the word for it. I'm using it because the association's alchemically, but Is mastery bliss? Is mastery death? Are we all chasing both at the same time, like a fox or a dog on his tail? I have other theories about that, but I digress. We're going to pull some cards because that is what I do. And we will see how we feel about everything. Oh gosh, there's still front faced from my pull because I will leave them for myself as inspiration. Dun, 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 dun. Tradish tarot deck. One of my favorites. A beautiful gift from a dear friend of mine. For Halloween, like my Christmas tree. New season, new chapter, new timeline. And it was a beautiful day. And we're taking a chance on ourselves, eh? All right. Much like we're sitting hanging out, welcome to my little space. And there are cards between us because there are. And because we can share this energy. Contrary to popular belief, I do think that the internet serves as a bit of a conduit for this stuff. Nothing against in person, but gotta move with the currents. We're gonna take 3 deep breaths together so we can adjust to the shadows of the new moon. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take one more deep breath in and exhale. Ooh, I love that. Okay. I'm excited and oh, okay. On Queen of Pentacles, bottom of the deck, which is a sign of things definitely, I think, working out. Of you understanding the offering that you make to whatever space you adjust to or in, or whatever circle you take part in. And if you feel like you're in a circle where you don't feel valued or valuable, then I feel like it's an issue of blindness. What did I say about the blind snake? It's a lack of sensitivity. I've heard too, like this year will be the year of the divine masculine. That doesn't mean control. That does mean honoring, and I do think that means an honoring of sensitivity. Um, I do think that means that y'all can get softer. Just saying. In fact, you need to, because the earth is crying, and wants to be heard and nobody's listening. I digress. But when I was breathing and when I was feeling that, I definitely think, again, with that Mars and Cancer energy, it's less about doing and more about feeling, less about talking, more about listening, more about understanding. You don't have to overcompensate, especially for other people that are not listening. Um, Sometimes those are ways that we just understand that's the reality those people are in. That's the small world that they occupy. It's kind of how I've dealt with the way people are vehemently against flat earthers, and the way flat earthers are also vehemently against the other, um, in one way, shape, or form. And I think on either side, it's a really great example of the simulation, and what our perception does to our reality. And some people, can only see the card versus the deck. Some people can only see the game versus the table it's on and the space that it occupies. Um, so take that and make something with it. What was I saying? Oh, directive hand, much more. Your active hand, much more directed, um, by feeling, much more guided, and not directing in and of itself. As excited as I was, uh, and like, what a funny example. Like, I couldn't wait to pull cards, but I also like had all of these other feelings to perceive. Um, an opposite or receptive hand, very much a steady current. It was very palpable. It was very like thick and like solid, contrary to, people's need for belief. It was exactly that. It was, thick, formed, and solid. Um, but can't necessarily see it to believe it. It was a steady current of ether, which I think says how we handle that excitement or that nervousness or that fear, which you mentioned earlier, um, how we not distill it, but sort of like set it on a tap, uh, like steady its pace, trickle in, sensory overload, overwhelm, or trickle it out. Um, when you, the idea of fainting in traditional Chinese medicine, for instance, um, is a collection of too much energy or a release of too much. So there's too little energy. And I think that that's more so it. I'm not saying like, you got to figure out how to deal with this crazy world. We're constantly bombarded by too much. There's nothing wrong with you for being overwhelmed, or for it hurting your heart. Um, However, when we have a full reserve, what do we do with it? When we have a full cup, where do we pour it? How do we pour it? What do we do? And it's funny, I think about that in a very physical way. What do we do with, our dead hair, or dead nails, or dead skin, even? Um, it is valuable genetic material. It's potent genetic material, which also I think makes it very potent for wishes or working with as well. Um, and sometimes that's the cleanest thing you can do, you know, burn loose hair and old toenails and make it as an offering to the soil. Maybe your plants will like it. um, let's see. That is, I think, in reference to the Queen of Pentacles too. Like, we still have offerings, even what we think is our waste, which is maybe part of the problem with the earth is we've stopped looking at our waste as something we can turn into an offering or recycle, and so the wheel stops. And that's not to say everybody. There's a lot of new technology and a lot of people working on new technology. Will they get murdered before it comes out? We'll see. Two of Cups, Nine of Pentacles, High Priestess. High Priestess, Gemini and Jupiter, referencing. It's inverted. It's again as a reference to see it and believe it. I think maybe now is a time where we're being asked to trust ourselves. We're being asked to kind of buck up, Buttercup. But I've said that to me. I won't say that to anybody else. But we're being asked to trust ourselves. We're being asked to have faith in ourselves. We're being asked to have strength. Um, Strength enough to love ourselves enough to stay. Um, I don't want to say brute force, but God, in the face of war. Um, and there's a lot of twos. It's facing yourself and understanding what it is you value. It's facing yourself and understanding what is fulfilling. Um, Kind of like, like epic movie scene when, like all the lights are gray and this, character's getting ready for their white collar job and they look in the mirror and it's just like dead expression. What goes on in their mind? What are they thinking when they're connecting with themselves in that way? What are you thinking when you're connecting with yourself in that way? Is it something you think about at all? Um, and that's very much the reflection here. That's also what you carry forward when you jump timelines. So 100% all has to do with this crossroads, this Jupiter and Gemini, where we value ourselves and how that reflects. That's very much what the High Priestess is about too, and how she reflects the moon. How will you reflect this blank slate? How will you reflect this bold opportunity? Um, how will you reflect in history, regardless of any, outside of personal choices? Um, how will you reflect in history? It has come up in recent events that I do think a big part of us is being asked to align with and find ease with who we are behind closed doors and who we are in person, who we are in the streets and who we are in the sheets. Um, but I do also think that's not just, showing up for yourself or, being accountable or showing up for your friends. Um, that's not just being at ease with the choices you've made. I do think that also references what are you hiding? What are you hiding from? Like surveillance. Um, And I do think that will reference circles and cycles again, and groupings, which I talked about earlier in the beginning, um, and how those things group. This Nine of Pentacles in the center of it is like molecules attracting like molecules. Um, but negative energy can condense too. That's often the stiffness that we find in our bodies. So be aware of that. Don't feel bogged down by that. And when you do feel it condensing and weighing down in your body, then again, how do we release it? How do we mitigate? How do we uh, respond to our body's cries for help? Because it is a frequency thing. And I'm not saying, it's a frequency thing. You're not just in a positive enough state. I'm saying it's a frequency thing. Fucking biogeometry. Every bit of us has a resonant frequency, and wavelengths can do incredible things. Um, are we fully aware of our homeostasis? Um, and what that can bring? Um, this Two of Cups and this High Priestess, and for all of what I'm saying, is your ability to face yourself, to face your fears, your ability to um, reflect those realities is what draws more of that positive energy. I feel like this is kind of like a layman's term law of attraction thing. Um, but it's also all inverted. So I feel like it's necessary to say that the converse of this is also like the level of anxiety that we keep in our hair, and the level of energy that our body can hold on to, especially when we don't believe in these things, or we, try to turn a blind eye. It is real. It happens. Um, it's That's what the internet is. That's what the radio is. Like, we've found ether and we infused it with things. I think it's silly to think that that's not the case. Like, we've also scientifically found that the ether is little bits of magnetic. Um, be aware of those thoughts and those uh, states of being, because it's not just thoughts. Our thoughts go crazy. Um, I feel like trying to control them is an insane feat, that would drive anybody mad. It's not about controlling your thoughts. It's about, I want to say like Autobahn, like you kind of give them space to roam, and then they find out they don't need to go that fast. Uh, that they don't need to, it's like traffic. Like they're rushing to nowhere in that context. And you give them an Autobahn and they won't rush because there's nowhere to rush. There's nobody rushing. Um, it's very much that instead. Uh, which I hope that metaphor works for somebody. I don't know where it came from. Um, we move on to numbers. Ooh, and we find the literal in space for this Two of Cups and this High Priestess. You fell up. I'm keeping you. You're pretty. It was perfect, and it fell up right. And that's the thing people do. So we're gonna rock it. It drifted down like the kite that it is, for all to see, like a magical moment should be. Party. The bridge. Much like we are hanging out, and like there are cards in between us. Do me a favor and take 3 deep breaths with me. Take a deep breath in and out. Take a deep breath in and out. Take a deep breath in and out. Beautiful. Ooh. Ooh. Why does that burn? Left hand receptive energy. There was a pivot. There was a twitch. There was a tweak. Um, it may seem like a paradigm shift, and maybe that's a good thing. But maybe that's exactly what makes it feel difficult. But a paradigm shift to like trust what you're good at and trust in the ways in which you perceive information and utilize it. Trust in your inspiration. Trust in and have faith in yourself and what got you here. And that's why Western astrology also exists, because when you follow your ego, it does take you to interesting places. It just cannot be the only one that drives. Um, when it is the only one that drives, because the burning that I felt was on the opposite hand. and directive finger and sort of a magi finger, right? A pointed finger, directive finger. That can be, too much direction, not enough expansion. That's, talking over listening. That's, all your eggs in one basket. That's um, going against Saturn lessons to push through in a Jupiterian, I don't know if that's the right word, Jupiterian, on a Jupiterian kind of way, or in a Mars and Cancer kind of way, or an Aries and Chiron kind of way, kind of like struggle busting through, gritting your teeth and bearing it, thick skinning it. Um, that can be a life sucker. And it both slows down and extends time in the most excruciating way. Uh, don't let anxiety rush time for you because it is a very constantly expanding and contracting thing. Somebody once asked me at a concert what I thought time looked like, and I thought it looked like a ball of rubber bands. And this finger hurting is a lot like snapping a rubber band, right? Um, pulling too far from the center point. Uh, you know, without taking in mind all of the rest of you that needs to go, and all of the other things that come into consideration. Um, it's abusive magic too, and I think too often is this a self-serving thing. I think even of the many YouTube tarot readers and astrologers and what have you, on with consistent like love readings and what have you. I think that adds to the cycle of addiction and validation, or an external validation in a way that is not a cycle I enjoy seeing or partaking in, right? Uh, and that I think is what creates this charlatan sort of idea around it too. But let me not go too far into that. Oh, interesting. I had a feeling you would come up. Bottom of the deck, Jack of Spades, inverted. So he's like this. I feel like he's in a cycle of hell, just polishing this broken dish, right? On There's nothing wrong with being a dishwasher at all. But I feel like there's a lot more pensive energy to this card, which is also swords energy, which is also spades. Um, it's a lot more pensive. I feel like it's very much about fears of fears holding back, fears holding somebody or something back. Um, it also does not. I think because it's inverted, it is severely less grounded. Um, in another context, this card has a lot of more positive meanings, right? Uh, but in this one in specific, I feel like it is a pensive circle of hell. A pensive state of mind, a pensive and ruminatory state of mind, right? Did I do the right thing? If only I had done this differently. It's the things that keep us up at night. It's the things that keep us sort of lost in mundane activities. Uh, but rest assured, there's not all that it has to be. King of Hearts, Eight of Swords, Nine of Diamonds. So we go through heart energy, through the mind, and then out to earth. This is your spirit, your mind space, and your external space, and the ways in which you rule them. This is ancient indigenous knowledge. This is a beautiful thing. The ways in which we turn to our heart for what we need, the ways in which we ask our heart what it needs from us, uh, are the ways in which we can then logically grapple with how to um, proceed, how to move forward, how to adjust, how to pivot. This Eight of Spades being cyclical, but also being reflective, being sort of like two cells annealing or splitting, perhaps. But is very much this card, taking what it needs and leaving what it doesn't. Take what you love, leave what does not spark that for you. Take what you love, leave what you need to change. And Nine of Diamonds is very much this card of gratitude, this card of love, this card of music to your ears kind of chimes, right? Um, Inverted, so I think it's more about your belief in those things. What is music to your ears, and what are the other forms it can take? In a very literal and real way, uh, it's not just money, it's sources of income and various ways in which we find abundance and wealth. It's not, just prosperity. It's ways in which we feel fulfilled and successful and empowered and safe. All of these different things are aspects of that. And that Nine of Diamonds is inverted, not because they're not there, but because it is asking you to believe in them so that you can see them. Does that make sense? The card that fell is our Eight of Diamonds. Ace of Diamonds, not eight. Ace of Diamonds. It's a wish card, 100%. It floated down like the perfect little kite that is on it. Is a wish card. And this is what this card is thinking about. That's what keeps him stuck. So, what is it, this Ace of Diamonds wish that needs to be made? And how do we make it happen? Um, is it something we even want a yes or no answer to? Um, and what if the answer couldn't be no? Then what? But if no one was looking, so nobody wanted you to fail, and everything worked out perfectly, then what? What's as new moon as your eye when peeled back to the pulp? To sink or thrive, as if those are the only two options. Uh, I urge you to think for yourself. My needs will be met because you are the waves and wonders. My needs will be met because I am the waves and wonders, because I align with the greater goodness of people, of the people, and the universe where the trees are strong and uphold the youth and their curiosity, and where a grand old willow can carry your leaves to the horizon to dream. That, that's where we'll wake up. That is where we'll wake up. Mm. With that, I will let you rock. I will let you roll. I will let you enjoy the luminosity uh, that we have in store within ourselves. And so, with that, until next time, Donata Koi.